Welcome back to the Supply Chain Lab. I'm Shitlike Maluleke, your host, and today we're joined by two distinguished guests, Professor Rose Luke, an academic expert in supply chain management, and Lungelo Khumalo, a seasoned industry professional. In this episode, we're diving deep into the complexities of African supply chains. We'll explore the continent's unique challenges and opportunities, from the impact of global trends to the real-life implications for everyday people. We'll look at recent strategic shifts by companies entering and exiting the African markets and how these changes are reshaping the economic landscape. Together, with insights from both academia and industry, we'll uncover how Africa is navigating these transformative changes and what this means for the future of trade and logistics. Whether you're a supply chain professional, a business leader, or simply curious about Africa's evolving economic landscape, this episode offers a wealth of knowledge you won't want to miss. Let's get started. So to kick things off, I'd like to dive into your guys' personal journeys. Could you share a bit about yourselves and what first drew you into the world of supply chain management, what sparked your interest, and how your experiences have shaped your perspective on this evolving world of supply chain management?
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's been an interesting journey for me. I started off on studying transport economics, and over time I realized that absolutely everything we do, whether it's moving ourselves or whether it's buying something, all boils down to how you get it there and how efficiently you get it into the market. And this sparked my interest, so I've ended up with it as a career, but to this day I think that it's a constantly evolving field. There's always something different. There's always something happening in this field. When you just think you've got the hang of it, it evolves further. We've got new technologies, etc. It's a field that keeps on giving in terms of excitement. So, and new things. So it certainly keeps you on your toes. And for that reason, I think it's an excellent field to be in, because you will never not want for transport. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. And you, Lungelo?
Yeah, so my entrance to the supply chain, I think it started all the way back in high school, actually. I got introduced to a subject called maritime studies, which is shipping course. So I was born in Durban, or I did my high schooling in Durban. And so that was my entry, and I really thought I'm going to go the shipping route, and that's where I'll be. But then, I got to see the wonderful opportunities that the rest of the supply chain has to offer. And so, in fact, I studied here at UJ long time ago. Well, maybe not that long. But yeah, that was when I fully got to appreciate the area of supply chain. And to Prof's point, it is a gift that keeps on giving. There's never a time when you're going to be bored in this environment. I remember when I was studying, I used to have friends that whenever I spoke to them about logistics, I would say, you're doing logistics, is that the one with trucks and warehouses? And trucks and warehouses are certainly part of it, but there's a lot more involved, and I think today was going to be an opportunity to touch on some of those elements. So yeah, that was my coming into the supply chain world. In the professional world, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity, I think I should call it opportunity, to work in various types of supply chains. So I worked in the chemical space, I've worked into the beer industry and the general food and beverages space, as well as now building networks. So it's been a wonderful career and very rewarding one.
Okay, it's quite exciting. So I think just to kick things off, maybe we should just try and paint a picture of what the current state of global supply chain is and how it's impacting the African continent. I don't know if you want to start this one, Lungs.
Okay, so I think in the industry, I think what we're seeing is a lot of evolution, a lot of changes in the supply chain. I think that's mostly driven by the technology that we're seeing, the disruption that we're seeing. I think we've had unprecedented disruptions. I think COVID was one of those instances that propelled us forward in terms of how supply chains look like and how they work. AI, blockchain is also bringing another opportunity and another challenge for supply chains where we need to adapt. So I would say we're in a properly evolving space. And that makes it both a challenge, which means if you're an individual involved in the supply chain, it represents immense opportunity. But of course, if you're an organization and you're thinking about how do you play this going forward, it is an opportunity that you need to have thought about, you have to experiment it around, and you need to have, sort of the wisdom to carry you through. So it's a very interesting space. I would characterize it at the moment.
Okay, so I think I fully agree with what you said. I think the disruptions have been a really interesting thing, because we have to start to think about supply chains differently. And I think the difficulty with the supply chain is that there's not a single supply chain that looks the same. Every single one has to be a supply chain that responds to its particular environment and its particular challenges. Then you come with something like COVID, where your supply chain is completely disrupted, or we have things like the hacking in the ports, any of these kind of things, truck drivers' strikes, all of those. But of course, from a perspective of technology, we've also got a lot of different technologies coming in, augmented realities, virtual realities, and they change the way we look at supply chains and so on. So I think the one thing that is an absolute given in a global supply chain is that it is constantly evolving. So for you to remain competitive in this environment, any retailer, mining company, whatever the case may be, you have to prioritize supply chain, because it will be the thing that makes or breaks you as to how well you're able to get your goods to the marketplace. So global supply chains, I think it's the case all over. I mean, if you look at how they were done 20 years ago, when I'd finished studying, and compared to now, if you don't stay on top of this game and how evolving it is, and it's so for companies, you have to be on top of that game. So I think it's an evolving, the nature of it is evolving, and I think that anybody who studies supply chain must be aware that you're going to be learning forever. Yeah. So you've got to have a learning mindset to be part of this, because that's where we are. I think just maybe some other things that we can mention is that supply chains are indeed global, as you're suggesting. So you have to be able to adapt to any environment. You have to be able to think about, how do I work with my Chinese suppliers? Maybe I've got linkages in Turkey. My fabric is coming from Turkey, my factory is in China, and this is suddenly a huge supply chain and a very complex supply chain, and how you deal with that. So the global nature of it is also going to give us so much that we have to think about in bringing everything together and making sure that we synchronize that whole thing to get your goods into the store.
I mean, I like what you're saying with regards to how global supply chains are. And I also like that you mentioned all the disruptions that are now impacting supply chains, such as COVID, like you mentioned, and then there's an increased risk of wars popping up all over. So what are some of your thoughts around how then this will impact the supply chain moving forward? Are companies still looking at more global strategies, or are they going to be looking at strategies like nearshoring because of how volatile things are now due to climate change and wars and these hackings that are happening?
Okay, so I think those things are always a balance, right? It's because in any supply chain, and I think you will probably attest to this, is that you always have those decisions about nearshoring, offshoring, whatever the case may be. And I think part of the supply chain is that it's a constant balancing act. And you've got to be able to look into the future and do your forecasting, and you may not be accurate. I mean, I don't think that anybody would have predicted that the war in the Middle East would continue for so long. I don't think that anyone would have predicted that the Russian-Ukraine situation would have such a major impact all over the globe on those supply chains. So you need to be able to balance that and manage your risk and think about whether you need to do nearshoring and offshoring or whatever the case may be. I think that also brings to a very agile supply chain in which you've got to be able to react quickly to to changes. And I think the most important part about that is just not being stuck, having put all your eggs in one basket and now you can't continue. So risk management is very much a part of global supply chains. I think that's critical. I think from a practical perspective, you could maybe
add to that. Yeah, no, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think risk management is probably the best way to characterize it. How do you build resilience around your supply chain? Because the shocks have now taught us that they're inevitable. They're going to come in some form or shape at any given point, and so the ability of the supply chain to recover and find a way around a particular shock. That means the kind of people that you've got in the supply chain must be of a certain skill level. The kind of contingency plans that you've got in your supply chains need to be robust enough to deal with that. So really agility, risk management, and really just how do you make your supply chain a lot more robust. Those are the sort of the key things that really come through. I mean, you spoke about forecasting. It's a big passion area for me. I always think of a quote by Yogi Berra, who's a baseball legend in the US. He always said that predicting the future is quite difficult, right? So it doesn't quite come easy. So I think that is the best solution that we can think about or that we can work with as industry at the moment. But I think on that line of thinking, we also have to look at the opportunities that exist for individuals, because the space is evolving. The challenges are certainly not going away. And what a wonderful space if you are studying, if you are looking to grow in this particular space, because the opportunities are literally endless, and some of them we actually haven't even figured out what they are. so what a wonderful space to be in.
Exactly. Whatever you're studying now, it's you make sure that you're also robust enough to withstand the shock of the changes in 5 years' time.
So this is also quite interesting. I like what you mentioned with regards to having the skill to be adaptable. So I know from an African infrastructure perspective, I know we have our infrastructural challenges. So can we just chat a little bit about how we overcome these infrastructural challenges? What are they? And do we believe we'll one day ever overcome them, or are we just always going to live with them?
I think it's a really tough question, because we know the infrastructure challenges are huge. And they have a major impact on our supply chains, and they have a major impact on our ability to play in global markets. And, I will always use the analogy that we may have cheap coal, but if it's expensive to get it to the market and somebody else is doing their logistics better, then it won't matter if somebody else outprices you or rather overprices on their coal or has a higher price, because if they can deliver it faster, you're saving on a lot of other costs like inventory costs and so on. So just our internal logistics has a major impact on how competitive we are in the supply chain. So we can't deny the reality that infrastructure is problematic. Some of it better than others, by the way. It's, national roads, for example, are quite good in South Africa, but not necessarily so across the entire continent. But we also have to face facts that mines, for example, it takes a long time to get to the national road in the first place, or to a port which might be a reasonable port, but the access to that point is a major disadvantage. So certainly in South Africa you will see that the private sector will constantly make a plan. So rail isn't functioning, we move to road. It's not ideal, but that's what is happening. Over time, I think that you will find people using a lot of technologies to be able to overcome this. So, looking at better routing and scheduling just to be able to work around the infrastructure challenges that we have. I mean, we're already seeing those kind of things just in short, like last mile delivery kind of solutions. But, those will be overcome over time. and it's not necessarily from a government perspective, but private sector tends to make a plan. But we should not underestimate the impact, because there are many people that disinvest because of the logistics, because it's difficult to run a business, to get your goods to market, and sometimes it just makes sense to go elsewhere. Ideally, we wouldn't like to see that happen. So, it would certainly make sense in many instances to have, for example, your factories closer to the port. So actually moving your location, which has significant cost implications, but it's a way of overcoming the distance and the infrastructure that's associated with that. So, these supply chain issues balance off over time, and long term anything is fluid, right? Anything can be changed. But in the short term, we have to face the fact that infrastructure is a problem. And I'm sure you find that in your business as well. But we're constantly seeking things, ways to overcome it. Having said that, I think that government needs to come to the party on infrastructure, because we've got wonderful resources. You need to be able to activate those resources, and for that, government needs to come to the party in terms of infrastructure. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And you, Lungs, do you have any comments, especially from an industry perspective? Are you seeing that industry is shrinking because of some of these infrastructural challenges, or are they, like Prof. Rose said, finding a way around the infrastructural challenges?
There's a quote I like, I forgot who it came from, but if you have a choice about, when you're thinking about Africa, to be pessimistic or optimistic, I choose optimism all the time, because the challenges are very real. And we spoke about the physical infrastructure really is not where it's supposed to be. Even in a country such as ours, where we're blessed at least with good roads, we had some good rail infrastructure, but the maintenance, the upkeep of those particular infrastructure fixtures is not at the level where it should be to facilitate global supply chains and make us a competitive country. But if you think about the opportunity that still exists in Africa, it is immense. You can look at it from one perspective and say, well, if I'm producing something in South Africa, to get it to the rest of the world might take, X amount of weeks or months. But they've got markets around us as a country. In South Africa, we've got Southern Africa. And how do we access those opportunities? There's a young population predominantly. We've overcome one of the biggest challenges around supply chains, by the way, which is, besides the physical movement of goods, it's information and financial flows, right? If you go back to that original, I think it was Bostock's and Kloss definition of supply chain, because the one part is the trucks and the warehouses, but the financial flows and the flow of information is an area that we could leapfrog and move forward, in fact, and set the pace for the rest of the world. So I think about those things whenever we're confronted with the challenges. I've actually experienced an example. You're talking about companies moving away. I've experienced an example of a company that manufactures cabling that has actually moved to South Africa because the cost, and it's supplying the rest of the world from the South Africa base, because the cost of power in the EU is so high, and the cost of labor and all those kinds of challenges mean that, being in South Africa, you've got an opportunity to relatively low cost. I know right now we're feeling the pain on electricity, but globally, believe me, we're nowhere near the kind of challenges that they experience. And secondly, you've got also quite a young population with skills, and I think that's the part that universities still play in that. So we've got some cards that are working in our favor. And so I always choose to be a lot more optimistic than pessimistic. If you think about it now, having gone through this last bit of load shedding, which was absolutely terrible, but we can go to any place in the world. You can go to a country like Nigeria, which has got bigger power challenges, and say, well, they've got all load shedding. We know how to navigate load shedding. And so the kind of resilience that gets built through the challenges that we face is something that will put us in good stead as a country and as a continent. And so let's not downplay that, despite the challenges we've got. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I think let's just take it back before we even go into how there's some companies exiting and others coming in, like you just gave us an example, Lungelo. How do we describe the supply chain to the everyday average African person, you know? Because I think the terminology supply chain, a lot of people started to think about it during COVID when they couldn't get their things. And now a lot of people throw the term around, but people don't actually know what supply chain is. And so if you guys could just give the ordinary, everyday person just an indication of what we mean when we say supply chain. What is the supply chain?
I think I always revert back to a single thing when I think about the supply chain, and I think about the clothes that you're wearing today. How did it get there? How did it get onto you? And you should bear in mind that you may have a cotton shirt on, which is coming from cotton, let's say it's grown in America, woven into fabrics in Portugal or Turkey, cut into cloth into form in a factory in China. And all of this happens somehow, but you are only concerned about the fact that you've seen it in the shop, but somehow it got there. And everything that went into it, the thread, the dye process, the growing of the cotton itself, the cutting of the fabric, everything happened at some point in a supply chain, and at some point a decision was made about how many shirts we're going to sell. And all the cotton that we need to buy for that, etc. You can think about the same as everybody knows a McDonald's burger, or any burger for that matter. It's you have to think about how did the meat get there. Somebody is farming beef somewhere. How did the rolls get there? How did the lettuce, the tomato, etc. get there into that shop at that particular time to make it available to you? And all of those decisions are decisions, supply chain decisions, every single one of them. So I think you can probably add to this from a practical experience, but it's all about looking at how do we make those decisions? How many cows do I need to be able to service this particular McDonald's outlet on this particular day?
Yeah. I love the example you made. I mean, I think it makes it so practical because we all interact with food, we all interact with clothing. I mean, the only thing I would just add to that is, you know, well, not really to add, but just to maybe pick out on that, because you mentioned that there are people that make decisions along the way. So actually, supply chains, in my view, really it's how do you bring all those resources together in order to deliver a particular item? And how does the information flow between the guy that wants to buy the burger and the farmer? And,
yes.
You know, that has to, and then there has to be payment that underpins all of that. And that for me is the bigger picture and the full story of what supply chain is. Yeah, that's the best way I can explain it. I'll definitely take that and use that going forward.
Yes, sometimes they refer to it. They very often refer to supply chain as the orchestration of the supply chain. So it's if you think about an orchestra playing in front of you, and there's the conductor, and ultimately he must pull it all together to make one fine tune. So I'm glad you mentioned those. The linkages, the flows 100%. Between everything is the thing that brings that whole supply chain together to give you your burger.
Yeah.
Okay, and then can you guys think of any examples where supply chain disruptions affect the ordinary person? I mean, I know I can think of one where you go to Woolies and the grapes are not available because there's a shortage of grapes in the market. So I don't know if you guys have any other examples and how you believe organizations can stop the disruptions or can at least reduce the disruptions in their supply chain.
Yeah, I think there are many that you can think about. I mean, you have bird flu or swine flu, something like that. You've got to hope that you've got an alternative source of supply. And I think I mentioned that earlier of having all your eggs in one basket. It can happen. And so, you know, a lot of mistakes have been made in supply chains in the past where we've selected a particular path and this is the route we are taking to market. But if something happens there and you've fully invested all your efforts into one particular farmer, and that particular farmer now has foot and mouth disease, then your supply chain is entirely decimated. So I think with the supply chain, it's always about thinking about the risk. And I think many supply chains have come to a sticky end because of it. And I think that for that reason, risk management is now such a key supply chain skill. Because to be able to look at that and say, what is the likelihood of that happening? And how do I hedge my bets around that? And I think you will find it in absolutely everything. I mean, an interesting thing is the economy does badly, for example. So instantly people start to swap out beef for chicken because that's just the nature. Beef is more expensive than chicken. So if you can't afford beef anymore, you revert to chicken. But I'm sure you can see that for the beef supplier, that's a massive problem because you had this demand and now you've lowered to a different demand. On the other hand, the chicken demand is going through the roof. So, you can continue in this vein, but it affects all of us all the time. And you can see it in the prices, you can see it in the availability, you can see when your global supply chains are functioning well, and when they're functioning badly. And when they're functioning badly, you will find the cost of whatever you're buying going up and up and up. And it's largely, I mean, there's many factors, of course, but it's largely attributable to the supply chain and how effective the supply chain is.
Yeah, I think definitely there's no shortage of examples of disruptions. I think you mentioned the ones that we've really felt as consumers is the egg shortage, the oil shortage, the wheat shortage. So there's certainly no issue. One perhaps that I think speaks to the point that I've been driving around the flow of information. So we had, I think it was probably 2 years ago, we had an undersea cable that was broken.
Yes.
And so we lost connectivity. The amount of disruption that particular thing did to a multitude of supply chain is immense, right? So it just highlights how connected or interconnected to the world we are. I think in the food space, I mean, we had a potato shortage, I think it was last year, and it meant you can't get your chips, you can't get your fried chips, you can't get a lot of other products that are made from the starch that is taken from potatoes. And so consumers really feel the pinch when they get to the till or to the supermarket and you don't find your computer screen, by the way, because it's actually where we buy a lot of our stuff, and then you can't find what you're looking for. But I think with that said, though, it also highlights how resilient or how much we've evolved. I mean, I think about the whole supply chain in e-commerce, for example. To build an e-commerce platform to supply you with something, you had to put immense amount of money building a website, getting the payment platform, getting the logistics partner. Now you can get a Wix website for $4. With the payment platform, you can put your stock in there. You can contact a company like a dropper, for example, that can pick up your product and deliver to your customer. That's the other side of these disruptions, which propel us in a much more positive direction. We can get things done quicker, faster, and better.
Yeah, and being able to get whatever you want, really, in a very short space of time. And that's also one of the really evolving areas is e-commerce, and it's purely, as you correctly point out, it's information flow, right? It's the ability to get information a lot faster, which then says to us that we are no longer constrained by what's on the supermarket shelves, because you can actually buy anything from anywhere, sometimes at a price, but you can get it, and we can see it with all the new role players in South Africa. It's in the e-commerce space, especially now you're seeing the Timos of the world and the Amazons all looking at the African market. So it's suddenly opening up a whole wide field. So it's always Africa is always a mixed bag, right?
100%,
It's
100%. Prof, I like the point that you spoke about around the decisions we make. There was a time when we believed so much in specialization and having particular parts of the world supply us with particular products. And I think of the car example, where we didn't have a shortage of cars or tires or steel, all we were missing were chips that go into cars. And we could not get cars because the area that produces the chips could not produce fast enough. And
Yes.
so that's the world we're living in. And now we've
Yeah.
learned some tough lessons, and let's see how we emerge from there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, I think it's that's why we say it's an evolving
Yeah.
space constantly.
Yeah, so I know one of the things that impact how quickly we evolve are regional trade agreements, and then an initiative such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, which influence the dynamics within Africa. What are your thoughts around how our trade agreements are set up, whether they are assisting in ensuring that we have better supply chains or are not?
Yeah, I think it's quite a difficult question to answer because in these arrangements there's always a lot of dynamics. You know, so you can look at SADC or any of the sort of agreements that we already have in place and ask yourself really if it's benefited us to this point. And I'm not always sure that the regional trade agreements will certainly within SADC, they do have advantages, but whether we've really capitalized on those advantages or not. But I think, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think that there seems to be a very strong drive behind it. And as with everything else, it takes a while to implement. But certainly what it's aiming for is connectivity on an African level. And that to me is something that has always been missing within the African continent, because all our supply chains tend to be international and less intra-African. And I always think you can look at it compared to the rest of the world and look at how the Americas trade and how Asia trades with each other. And we can then say that Africa does not trade well with each other. But the point of the African Free Trade Agreement is exactly that. It's to open up those borders, and there must surely be, we have so many resources in Africa, there must surely be a lot that we can trade with each other and benefit with each other. It does, of course, require that you look after the infrastructure, which I think we've already spoken about, but a big part of that plan is connectivity from a rail perspective, better connectivity from an air freight perspective, in particular sort of deregulating that market and making sure that we get better prices on just intra-African movement of people or goods. And, I think that's essential, because I think, as you will know, that if you want to fly to Mali, you must go to Doha first, for example, which, if we can free up those kind of things and make it easier, people movement or goods movement, it's all that we're looking for. So the free trade agreement has the potential to be absolutely massive for us. It would also mean the biggest trade agreement in the world. But it needs support from all the countries, full buy-in, and then proper implementation. So those always require time to iron out. But ultimately, I think it's a very positive move for Africa, because if we can open up those borders for goods, make not having prohibitive tariffs and so on, you will already be there. Add infrastructure improvements to it, and it's extremely positive. So I think watch this space. We hope that it will achieve everything that it needs to achieve.
So I think in practice, I'm also optimistic, but perhaps on this one a lot more cautiously optimistic, because the idea is absolutely fantastic. I think it's such a great opportunity for our continent to have this agreement that has been put in place. However, it is a complex one, because we've got 54 countries. Even if we just consider sub-Saharan Africa, different languages, lots of borders, infrastructure not the greatest. So to bring this to life and really see the benefits, we actually have to open up those countries. As the Prof is mentioning, just flying to a neighboring country, you have to go around the world just to get to a Mali, for example. So that remains a big challenge for me. So I think if I were to say something to the governments and the people that are looking at it, there needs to be a bigger, stronger push to put this idea into reality and make it practical and open for businesses to be able to access the opportunities. Because I think just by doing that, the necessary capital will be found to build the businesses, find the opportunities and trade with each other. But we need the governments to set the environment and allow it to be, or make it an enable environment to be able to do that. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think it's such a positive step for our country. And if you think about it, if we don't seize the opportunity, other investors from all over the world will see it and will come to our shores, because on top of the agreements that we have in the continent, we also still maintain agreements with the East and the West, and that puts us in quite a strategic role globally, that we can be able to serve markets in the East and as well as markets in the West. So there's a lot of opportunity that this represents, but I think we need to put it a little bit more practical so we can get into it.
Yes,
right?
I think I can only say that I agree with that, because it's one of the things we'd want to look at is just quite simply, one of our biggest issues is crossing borders. And come high season, a truck can spend 2 weeks at the border post. It's which from a logistics and a supply chain perspective is actually insane, because you then have to consider what are your customers doing, because they're waiting for your goods. So when you think about that, that creates an enormous amount of cost and time in the system. And those are the things that we want to solve with this. But it's also something that, as you say, cautiously optimistic, because they require concerted effort to be able to go and negotiate with each country and go, this is what we're trying to do, and just achieve that breakdown of those kind of barriers, because those are solid barriers to how efficient and effectively you can run your supply chain. But as we say, we watch this space. It's exciting. We hope to see the implementation there of sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And I think if it can just work with even a few countries, it doesn't have to be with everybody at first, but I think if we can get it right with just a few countries, with similar, I guess, traits and goals, then maybe it can then be rolled out on a bigger scale once those few countries get it right. I think this is a good way to look at it. But we also have great technology now. What are your guys' thoughts on how technology is improving the supply chain, how it can assist with some of these trade interruptions? What are your thoughts around technology and how we can enhance the supply chain and also enhance how countries trade?
I think for me, some of the very simple uses of technology, just in sort of the cases we're referring to before, is just simply using an e-system to pre-clear your goods through border posts. So technology already proves its worth. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing about technology is the real-time information that it's going to give us, and where we will see this really making a difference in supply chains is, for example, in your temperature-controlled supply chains, where previously, if you sat at the border for 2 weeks, you can just, write your shipment off whether it's off or not, because if you've got food sitting there for 2 weeks, that's done. Now, of course, we've got the technology to be able to manage the temperature, see what it's doing, see to what extent we can manage it, and so on. So real-time information will give it the kind of information that we need to be able to react to those kind of shocks. So I think real-time information is going to be the biggest thing taking our supply chains forward. I'm sure you have lots of lots of experience with this in your industry.
No, 100%. I think for the supply chain or for organizations, certainly that availability of information is going to be critical, right? I've already alluded to the issue of payments and getting payments. Such a sticky point in global supply chains. I actually, the one aspect which I'm very keen on understanding and very interested in is how it shapes the customer behavior. So the consumer is now empowered. They've got options. They've got all this information at their fingertips. And how will that consumer preference move and their demands move, and how will the supply chains react? So that's really an area that I'm quite keen to understand. But certainly, these technologies are gonna change the way we do things. I mean, I was just thinking, right now we're interacting with robots. Probably if you're looking for a service and customer service, you're interacting with a bot. And if you think about it and extend that to the kind of technologies like large language models, where these technologies can actually converse to you as if you're conversing to a person. Think of the health supply chain. The areas where you couldn't get doctors, and now you can do real-time diagnosis. I mean, there's been examples of cancer diagnosis machine that is as good, if not better, than actual doctors. So you can just imagine the kind of opportunities that brings to the supply chain. Of course, you'll have the disruption that will come with that, but it is an immense opportunity that we've got. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think now that you mentioned that, it's recently saw a case where they're monitoring remote monitoring of fridge temperatures in rural clinics for temperature controlled medicines. So quite interesting. Then add to that drone deliveries, which suddenly makes it a lot easier to get medicines to remote areas. Just some of the things that we're looking at. So, I mean, the application of technology in these supply chains, particularly in Africa, where the access is not good, is suddenly immense.
Yeah.
And then if you just think about it, even in applications such as farming, can you just imagine a model that can actually predict if you're going to have a flood, or not a flood, or some sort of a weather disruption or drought, whatever the case is, and then you can start, making alternative plans earlier on, rather than realizing, when the potatoes don't come out the ground, that you've got a problem. So think of what that opportunity looks like, right?
Yeah, exactly. And not just for disruptions, long-term changes as well. I think the farmers are definitely looking at, as the climate is changing, what is better to plant in that land and so on. So the technology is giving us a lot, a lot to think about as well.
And so what do you guys envision for the future of supply chains in Africa, considering all the challenges that you've just mentioned, as well as the opportunities? What do you envision for the future?
I think we'll face a lot more disruptions. We will continue to face them because, this is just something that we accept in the supply chain in general. But we also know that, we have realities such as hacking at ports and strikes and infrastructure which is not always functioning as it should do. Various things that can interact. So we have to think that those are realities. So I think that African supply chains risk management has to become a top priority. I think also resilience, balancing your supply chain. I think that's an absolute key to it, making sure that you've always got your various alternatives in place. But I do see them growing. I mean, despite the fact that we see disinvestment, we see investment on other sides. So, for that reason, I think we're going to see a shift in the kind of products that are moved, and the kind of markets that we will be supplying in the future. For that very reason. So investment and disinvestment will certainly remain on the landscape, and uncertainty will certainly remain on the landscape. We hope to see more positive developments in terms of infrastructure. I certainly hope that we can see a lot of cross-border investment in linking Africa better. It's on the radar, so we hope that that's part of it. And I think that one of the things that will be a constant in supply chains is that Africa has a very young population. And there are many pros and cons of having a young population, but one of the things is that we have a very tech-savvy population, and technology will be a big driver in our supply chains going forward. I think the one thing that we can say about African supply chains is that they are by nature resilient. It's we've had to deal with so much shock in the past that we've just become a continent of resilient supply chains. So I see that as very positive, and being able to handle. I know that when we have electricity outages, for example, we already know how to manage it. Whereas you see electricity outages in the rest of the world, and it's a scramble to be able to cope with it. We've already dealt with it. So to a certain extent, things that are on the radar, like global electricity shortages, are already a feature in ours. So we are resilient in that matter. So I think technology, young population, will continue to see shocks. I hope we see infrastructure and African connectivity, because I think ultimately we need that to really be the powerhouse that we should be.
Yeah, no, certainly for me, I think there's a bright future. So how I look at it in terms of the positives, as you mentioned, the young population really stands out. It is really a unique dividend that has been given to Africa, or that Africa has, as opposed to the rest of the world. I mean, I think the East is battling with a far different challenge with aging population and so forth. So young people, of course, they're tech savvy. They'll still need lots of services and goods to be produced, food. And so that represents a big opportunity for us as a continent. I think we may not follow exactly the development path that our counterparts in the East and the West. We may have a different one. So there's this concept of a smart cart, so not a shortcut, but a smart cart, and actually leapfrogging and jumping into things that make sense for us, that work for us. So if you think about solar, the amount of solar in rural Africa is probably bigger than what you've got in Europe, because there is no other alternative. So so you bringing solar, that's not new to us. The electricity issues, we know how to already navigate those kind of challenges. And so I think those things put us in a good space. I think the challenge around infrastructure is going to be real, because at the end of the day, you need to move things around, you need to move goods around, you need to move people around. But you mentioned drone deliveries. That's not an idea that's too far-fetched, because if you think about it, in the last 5 years, the price of a drone has gone from thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of US dollars to now you can get a drone for 1,000, and you can just imagine what's going to happen in the next coming years. If you think about 3D printing, that's also coming down. I mean, we've got so much technology happening at the same time that we forget that there's this whole idea of 3D printing, and that is continuing to evolve and couple with these technologies such as AI and large language models like ChatGPTs and so forth, that you can now actually converse with the computer and tell it what you want instead of being able to even do coding. Now, these are like game changers that will make the playing field completely different. So I am concerned by our governments, their ability to move quick in some of these opportunities and enable this kind of innovation. But I'm also encouraged that we've got a bunch of really resilient people that will make a plan that will move us forward. So yeah, it's going to be a mixed bag that I'm quite keen to see how it pans out. But yeah, I think on the balance of it, I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about the African supply chains.
Okay. And one last question, just around the skills that you think the everyday supply chain person will have to have for today and for the future? What are the key skills you think people should be looking to acquire apart from what they are being taught in school?
Yeah, I think soft skills are enormously important. You know, you certainly have to have a base knowledge of the various components of the supply chain, but I think analytical skills are hugely important, and tech skills, to be quite honest. Those are sort of more the hard skills that you need, but you know, you must be able to look at something and make a decision based on it. You know, so analytics, those kind of things will be very, very important. But from a soft skills perspective, I think that one of the things about the supply chain is that you cannot look at a little piece in isolation. You know, because it's connected. We've spoken about orchestration and so on. So you have to have the ability to think big and to look at the bigger picture and to look at the interactions. So we go beyond, you know, doing a particular job to, you know, for example, procurement, to be thinking about, if I procure this, how long is it going to take? How long will it take to service the customer? Is this what marketing requires? How does it all fit together to ultimately deliver at the end of the line? It's also, supply chains are complex, I mean, just the things that we've been discussing today. I'm discussing the quality of the roads and crossing the borders, and on the other hand, you've got very high-tech customer interfaces, etc. So, you know, you've got to be able to think at that level and that complexity, and then bearing in mind that you might be dealing with Turkey today and China tomorrow and Portugal the next day. So your people skills and interpersonal skills are also soft skills that are hugely important. You know, so I think those kind of, all the soft skills that we can think about are absolutely necessary to be part of the supply chain, because it functions based on working together. For that reason, you've got to have all of those and think about the big picture in the end of the day.
100%. For me, I think there's no substitute for the basics, right? So being able to communicate and express yourself, still very important. Numeric skills, being able to analyze things and be able to synthesize and find out, you know, what is really important. And in the world specifically where we're going to have a flood of information coming at you, to be able to synthesize and actually make sense of lots of data or lots of information points is going to be really critical. And leading to that is going to be decision making, because there's still going to be a lot of decisions that we'll need to make. We'll have the support of the tools, but of course, if you don't know what to ask the tools will not be able to assist you. So the ability to make good decisions, those are the things that I would really index on if I was a young person now looking at the type of skills. I think if you think about it and reflect in terms of careers, I myself know that these new technologies, AI, is definitely going to impact my current career. Maybe my job might not exist in this current form. There's going to be other higher level things that I may be able to add as a value add to my business, to my community, to my country. But certainly the most important skill is the ability to interact and work with technology. And you know, one of the key simple things I'll tell you now is how to write a prompt. How do you get these forms of technology, ChatGPT, whatever, there's an AI for everything. How do you actually get stuff of it? How do you prompt it? How do you get, you know, high quality feedback from it? That's a really important skill. I don't think it's been flagged as a skill yet, but that is the
but it's huge, yes.
you need to know that. And then you spoke about soft skills, and I think that's the hardest part, because what these machines and these technologies will not be able to do is to replace the human element, building relationships, communicating, cultural sensitivity, because that's still the secret sauce in getting business done and getting things done. And then, you know, if you're in the field of business, it's ultimately the secret sauce to making tons of money, I think. So certainly those soft skills, which are very difficult to master, are going to be invaluable going forward. So I really think that's where you need to be. If you're a young person and you're watching this and you're thinking, what do I need to do? Solidify the basics, but really index on these soft skills as well as the technology skills. I think you'll do absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We hope to have you back soon. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
It
very
was a
much for-
pleasure being here.
Thank you. Thank you.